progressivism. It's given us a divided society, a fractious and atomized society. It's given us a culture where our educational standards are slipping and where our children fail to identify with democracy. The church has made far too much of an effort to accommodate the culture and rescue people from it. We need rescuing.
Hey there, and welcome to the Upside Down People podcast. I'm so glad that you found yourself here today. If this is your first time joining us, this is a podcast where we have gospel-centered conversations with people who love Jesus. And you're sure to learn something new, be encouraged or inspired by these conversations. If you're a regular friend of the show and want to show us some love and support, you can do that in two easy and simple ways. The first is by liking and subscribing to our YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify channels, wherever you listen to the show. The second, even more importantly, if you're able to share this conversation or a previous conversation with your family and friends, or someone you think would really benefit from it, that would really show support to us as well. With that said, today's guest is a social commentator and podcaster himself. He's known for serving Australia as Deputy Prime Minister for 6 years between 1999 and 2005. I'm grateful and seriously honored to have this conversation with none other than John Anderson. Let's dive into it. All right, well, I'm joined here with former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, John Anderson, who's also a social and cultural commentator, and you've got a podcast of your own called Conversations. John, welcome to the Upside Down People podcast.
It's great to be with you, Caleb.
So I've been anticipating this conversation for a while. I've followed quite a few of the conversations you've had on your podcast, and I just really enjoy your point of view for a number of reasons. I think you really bring critical thinking and reason into the conversation, but the thing that I'm most encouraged by is just the undergirdedness of your faith, and how Christianity seems to really illuminate a lot of these other views that you have. So I'm keen to get in a conversation around that, but before we do, maybe a good place to start is just to get to know yourself a bit. So whereabouts you grew up, and then how you found yourself in politics and the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, of all places.
I'll put those down. I'll look better without them too. Well, my family came out from Scotland in the 1830s. We've always farmed in the northwest of New South Wales, firstly around Inverell, and for the last 110, 120 years where we are now. I actually grew up in this house. It's always been home. That's unusual. Most people move around quite a bit. I haven't, although I've been away for school, away for university, and then travelled for the 2 decades that I was involved in public life. So a varied life, I suppose you'd say. And I'm married to Julia. We have 4 children and 1 son and 3 daughters. And we have 5 granddaughters and 3 grandsons.
Wow.
4 of whom live here on the farm with us, which is a lot of fun.
That's brilliant. And so, I mean, I've got 2 daughters of my own. You have 3 daughters and 1 son. What was that like, raising three girls?
Well, it was hectic. In many ways, my wife kept the home fires burning for quite a few of the years that they were growing up because I was away so much in public life. That's hard. Fathering is a great joy. It's a great responsibility. I'm actually patron of the Australian Fathering Project, which is based in Perth. And the Fathering Project seeks to help fathers understand just how important they are to their children, how much their dads need them, and what a difference their presence, their interaction, their modelling, and their encouragement makes to their children. Sadly, a lot of Australian men in particular can't say that their father was a strong and positive influence that perhaps they should have been. Many can, but far too many can't. So, look, it's an important role. I loved it. I always tried to carve out as much time as I could and to make sure it was quality time. You can't have quality time without quantity time, of course. I mean, you can't say, right, boy, we've got 15 minutes and it's going to be quality time. You have to have quite a bit of time so that they open up and expand into space, if you like, because you never know when they're going to feel like talking to you about the things that really matter.
Yeah, very true. I mean, it feels like there's a slow shift happening in many ways, in a positive sense, to, like you said, with projects like the fathering projects, to really encourage the role of the father in the home. But then at the same time, you see a lot of deconstruction in that family unit, right? That you see taking place in society, where people want to advocate that a mother and a mother can do anything a father can do, and even vice versa. And that's pretty detrimental to not just the family unit, but the child's upbringing, I'd say.
Well, I think the reality is that the research is quite clear, compelling, really, that actually mothers and fathers bring different things to their children's upbringing. And much of it is what our culture would have regarded as common sense and easily observed. It just happens that the science backs it up. We know, for example, just to pluck one thing out of the air, that dads are particularly good at teaching their children how to delay gratification.
Right.
Often through play. This sort of stuff's been widely studied. If you don't believe me, there's somebody from the secular left, and his name is Warren Farrell, and he wrote a book called The Boy Crisis. It's well worth reading for anyone who's worried about our boys in particular. They're not doing well, but neither are the girls, it has to be said. You know, the problems of mental illness and anxiety, depression, self-harm amongst young people is very high. It's very real. And we do know quite a bit about this stuff. And it's useful for parents to know it and understand it as well.
Yeah, very good. So just getting back into a bit of yourself. So how did you find yourself in the position that you did back in the early 2000s, late 1990s as the Deputy Prime Minister? And what was that experience like for you?
Well, those are a couple of pretty big questions. I was not involved in politics at university, although I was broadly quite interested in what might be called public policy. I left school during the Whitlam years. They were tumultuous. Eventually, the Governor-General called an election. That was controversial in itself to resolve a deadlock in the Senate. A coalition government was elected. In many ways, I found myself disagreeing with much of their approach, although there was a man I admired greatly in their ranks, two really. One was Doug Anthony, the leader then of the Country Party, or the National Party as it later became. Another one was, in fact, John Howard.
Right.
I always admired him when he was treasurer. But then when I left university and came home to the country, everyone in those days signed up to the local branch of, in my case, the National Party.
Right.
So I did. And one thing led to another. At the age of 27, which is pretty precocious of me, I suppose, although I didn't initiate it, I was asked by a retiring federal member to run in his place. I'd never considered it. I was completely taken aback. But I sought the counsel and wisdom of older people that I particularly respected, including people in our local church. And they said, go for it, have a go, see what happens. And one thing led to another. I found myself in the federal parliament. It's a tough process. It's not easy. You know, it's not for the faint-hearted. There's no way I would want to imply that it's some easy ride, and it's got worse because we've become hypercritical and we've lost the ability to debate now with respect for one another.
Right.
And we ought to be very willing in debates. It's good to have a willing debate, but it ought to be about the issues, not the other person. We
Okay.
emotionalise everything now. We so easily, and this is really, it's quite bad. In fact, I'll go so far as to say it's seriously wrong, even evil. The way in which now so often people will attempt to win a debate by simply attacking another person at the level of the person. There was a famous old saying attributed to Voltaire. I don't think he said it actually, but it's attributed to him. I may disagree with you, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it.
Right.
We've morphed that into, if you dare disagree with me, you're an evil person, and
Yeah.
I'll do everything I can to shut you up.
That's yeah, I mean, you're a huge advocate for freedom of speech, and it's clear. I'm wondering, like, why should anyone care about meaningful dialogue and the necessity of freedom of speech? Like you're saying, it's so important. It's almost critical for the progression of society. Why do you think people should care about it? And you've touched on a few issues that you've noticed that people are emotionalizing dialogue, so they're attacking one another at an emotional level, and they also sort of trying to attack the identity rather than the topic on the table. What's the compounding effect of that?
Huge. There are really four freedoms which in a properly just and free society are vested not in the government or even in society. They're vested in the individual. They're all equally important in a way. They're four legs of a stool. The first is freedom of conscience, belief and religion. You must be free to choose to believe as you decide, hopefully after a period of soul-searching and inquiry. Everyone should think through seriously what life's about.
Right.
Everyone should have the right to seek truth and to practice it when they've found it. Secondly, freedom of speech is it's really the freedom that lets you defend the other freedoms. If you don't have freedom of speech, you can't defend your right to believe as you choose and to act in accordance with your conscience.
Right.
Thirdly, freedom of assembly is unbelievably important. As long as it's not causing harm to others, for example, here's a shocking idea, we are all free to discriminate. Of course we are.
Yeah.
You don't have, when you have a dinner party at your home, you don't have all of Australia. You don't have all of Western Australia. You don't have all of Perth. You don't even have all of your friends. You have the people that you choose to have with you for company that evening.
Right.
Now, of course, there have to be some limits, but they ought to be very few and far between. The fourth freedom that everyone overlooks, it's a very biblical one. It's the right to own private property and to trade it. And that includes your intellectual ability so that you can earn a living. You're not going to make something or produce something or contribute your brains and abilities to a society if you're not rewarded for it, if you can't support your family by selling what you have. It might be an extra bushel of wheat. It might be a sweater. It might be a motor car. It might be your intellectual ability. But you see, without that right, you really are in trouble. So that's a long-winded answer, but it's a very important one. And I believe that we should only give up our freedoms. They're not granted by government. Government's job is to protect them, not to give them. We should only give up our freedoms in a free society when it's more advantageous to that society as a whole to surrender some of your freedoms in the collective good.
Right.
I mean, a really simple example might be during the Blitz in the Second World War in England, people gave up their right to have their curtains open at night. Everyone agreed you had to close your curtains so that there was no light in the sky. That was a freedom taken away for people for the duration of the war in the collective interest and returned after the war. It's an obscure example, but it serves the purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. So you mentioned the right to private property and the right to, or the freedom to trade it is rooted in like a biblical understanding. Yeah. Can you explain that a bit more?
Go to the Ten Commandments. 2 of them refer to not coveting your neighbour's goods and not being a thief, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So was it this idea of freedoms that got you into politics? Was that something that motivated you to it? No.
Not particularly, no. Because in those days, the culture wars were not as live as they are today. The issues then were economic policy.
Okay.
When I was at school, the country was on strike more, it seemed, than it was at work. There'd be a mail strike, so you wouldn't get mail because, the Redfern Mail Exchange, which was the biggest in the country, one of the biggest in the world in the East, was on strike. Every time there was a school holiday, the airlines would go on strike.
Right.
Every other week there'd be a petrol strike and you couldn't get around. The economy was collapsing. And the Prime Minister of Singapore was a very famous Chinese statesman, or Singaporean Chinese statesman, Lee Kuan Yew, a towering figure. He actually said that Australia was in danger, his words, not mine, of becoming the poor white trash of Asia. That was very humiliating for me. So it is fair to say, I think, that when I got involved, it was more about a belief that the country had lost its way on economic policy.
Okay.
I now would take the view that we're in a mess economically, but it's because, in fact, we're in a mess culturally. You can't have a strong economy, prosperity and opportunity for people, particularly young people, on the back of a fractured, divided, distrustful, non-saving, non-hard-working populace. Now, that's not everybody, but there's far too much of all of those things in our society in Australia today, and we are paying the price for it. Our living standards, young people are not imagining it. It is hard to buy a house. It is hard to make ends meet. It's there in the numbers. And Australia has the fastest collapsing living standards in the OECD.
Oh, wow.
The OECD is the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's based in Paris. And it's really 35 of the world's freest and most prosperous democracies. Australia's one of them.
Right.
And they help everyone learn from one another's mistakes. They help to point to good policy. They help to make a difference. In many ways, it's been a magnificent organisation. We're a member, but our educational standards and our living standards are, in fact, sliding down the pack. The two are related, of course.
You would attribute that to this cultural wars?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, we have had decades now, progressivism. That's the fuel we've put in the tank instead of traditional Christian beliefs and values. Progressivism. It's all about me. It's all about identity politics. What's it given us? It's given us a divided society, a fractious and atomised society. It's given us a culture where our educational standards are slipping and where our children fail to identify with democracy and the freedoms that it gives them. We just can't get away from this. A lot of our children are coming out of school having taught very little, having learnt very little history, very little about what giants made our society what it is, and inclined to be hypercritical, that somehow, we're an oppressor nation created by colonists from the other side of the world, and we've done nothing good. In fact, well, one simple bit of evidence, people from all around the world want to come here to live. Another piece. When I was in the Parliament, I used to meet with school groups all the time. If I asked them, what country would you most like to live in? Occasionally they would mention another country. Sometimes they'd say New Zealand or Canada or America, occasionally even Britain. They all happen to be democracies. But overwhelmingly they'd say, no, this is the best country in the world. This is where we want to live. Well, there's a reason for that. And we ought to stop being so negative and recognise the extraordinary gifts that we've enjoyed.
Yeah, I think you're definitely correct on that. I'd love to. So I'm sure you've heard this quote before by George Santayana. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. What's your
Yes.
thoughts on that with what's currently unfolding in front of us in Australia and around the world in the West, particularly?
Well, that quote is absolutely right. History proves it. And the story of, if you like, civilizations down through the age, a civilization, Os Guinness would say, arises when enough people agree on enough in common for long enough to form an identifiable period and a culture. So the Zulus had one. The Aztecs had one. The Romans had one. The Egyptians had one. There was the Greek Empire and civilization. Then we have more recently lived, I think you would say, in the West under what's called the liberal global order since the end of the Second World War, when the Allies, exhausted as they were, but triumphant nonetheless, they'd won the war, put in place the broad architecture that we have now. It's collapsing. It's collapsing from within, and it's under attack from without. And these are very weighty matters. I'm deeply concerned that our media is not really bringing Australians face to face with how the world is changing and how we need to step up and be more active. I'm a believer in two kingdoms. The greater kingdom is the kingdom of God. That is where the vast majority of our existence will be spent, because I believe it's eternal. I do believe that. I believe it very profoundly and very seriously. But I also think this kingdom matters. We ought to seek to build just and fair societies, societies where there's opportunity, where those who are genuinely in need can be helped, and those who can and should accept their responsibilities do so, and where we seek justice and fair play. I think that really matters. Those things really matter.
Yeah, I agree. Something that's interesting that's unfolding, sort of two things at the same time. Like it's almost like what's happening in culture is there's a parallel happening within churches. I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems like churches, I'll try and explain my thoughts there. The first thought is there's this resurgence of Gen Zs going back to church, a spiritual awakening, if you say, where young people are looking for something substantial, they're looking for something rooted in history that doesn't sort of throw away reason, but like acknowledges a bunch of different things. But there's also been a decline in the church for a long time, and I think it's because what you're touching on is there's a lack of history and understanding, particularly in the West, where there's this strong sense of individualism. So churches have catered towards the individual, and they've said it's all about you, and have forgotten to say, well, you're actually part of a greater kingdom now. You're part of the kingdom of God. And because they haven't taught the history that, like, Christianity, you're not just a Christian here in 2025, but it's 2,000 years of history where people have believed and fought and sort of wrestled with doctrines and their faith. That's what you're a part of. And then the history goes to the start of the world. Churches I've seen where they focus more on the individual, and it's like, this is, you come here and you feel good. They seem to be dying off, and there's this resurgence of churches that have placed an emphasis on, let's look at our history, let's look at what you're a part of. It's not actually about you, it's about the community of believers that you're a part of. Is that something that you notice? Or is that...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? What's your thoughts on that?
I think that the church has made far too much of an effort to accommodate the culture,
Right.
rather than rescue people from it. we need rescuing. The world is really a place that in many ways seduces us onto a broad and easy road. And I touched on it a moment ago, particularly in these times of progressivism, which results in more and more distrust, more and more unhappiness at an individual level and a societal level. And we do live in an age where we basically say to young people, you can be lord over your own life. Don't you dare believe for a moment that there's a higher authority who might have any say over how you ought to behave. Don't buy this line that you're not perfect. You are. And if you're not happy or something's gone wrong, then you must be a victim and the government should fix the problem or somebody else should pay for what they've done. It's the language of division. It's the language of distrust. It's the language even of hatred and of denigration of others. The Bible talks about something that is radically, radically different. It's absolutely realistic about the fact that, if you like, we won't take ourselves lightly. We won't put ourselves down by choice, but it instructs us to love our neighbours as ourselves, to do unto them as we'd have them do unto us. That's radical. That is not what our culture teaches. We've abandoned even the so-called golden rule, which was derived from the scriptures, but the idea that you'd treat others as you wanted to be treated. That's not something we put before our kids very often now. It really isn't. It's the constant and overwhelming message is it's about you. And it doesn't work. This is a problem. In reality, if we were to, as a society, really truly say, yes, I'm an individual, I have dignity and worth, but that will only work if I recognise you equally have dignity and worth, and I respect you equally. It's got nothing to do with their talents or their station in life or their wealth or their gender. It's got to do with the fact that a fellow human being, if you like, as Robert Menzies, our longest-serving Prime Minister, put it, we need to recognise that all souls are equal in the eyes of heaven. And it's very tricky once you say, well, there's no heaven, there's no God, there's nobody there saying all souls are equal, to find a basis. It's a real intellectual problem, actually, upon which we might respect others. When a higher authority says, even that person that you detest and that you can scorn and they might be unattractive and they might be stupid and they might be irresponsible, you might be able to find a million reasons why you don't respect them. They're the other political party or the colour of their skin is different. Very different matter if you believe in an Almighty who says, I love them all equally, I love you all equally, and I died for any one of you who commits in faith to Christ.
Yeah, and
which is the Christian message.
Exactly. And it goes back to what you were saying a bit before in terms of where you can't have meaningful dialogue or where meaningful dialogue sort of breaks down is where you start attacking another person's emotions or their identity or whatever that may look like. And you can't actually focus on the topic. You can't recognize another person being made in the image of God, their human dignity, and you have to try and break that down. And I think that's something really, it's really destructive in our social fabric, where we can't have the freedom to think freely and to talk freely, which there's two sides to that coin. There's the one side is potentially offending people, but then the other side is I think people also need to realize that if you want to speak freely, you have to be potentially offended yourself. And I think the progressive society is there should be no offense to the self, and that's sort of what we're losing.
I think you're onto something there, Caleb. I really do. There's an American congressman whose name escapes me right at this moment, but he was a SEAL before he was in the parliament. In other words, a tough guy in the military.
Right.
And he told me once that his motto in public life was to do his very best not to give offence and to double his efforts to not take offence. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I honestly think if more people are able to capture that, we'd be able to have really constructive conversations, which could solve so many different things.
You will never get good policy outcomes, good decisions if you haven't had a proper informed debate. If you truncate the debate, if you shut it down, if you sneer instead of debating, if you denigrate others, you will never get first quality outputs. You might win the day, but you'll lose the war.
Brilliant. And is that something that you see happening within Australian politics, where there's truncating and just there isn't that constructive conversation happening? Because some of the policies that are coming out are pretty crazy.
I'm trying to think of when I see the last time I saw a genuinely high quality debate. I think our debating in the public square in this country has reached the level of the disgraceful. And I think that is why, by the way, the Australian people are now so politically restless. And you can see that in the numbers. As a simple matter of mathematics, it is an extraordinary thing that of all the Australians who were eligible to vote, a third or less than a third of them returned the current government with a record majority. But 2/3 of Australian people didn't think that they should have been returned, and yet they've been returned with a huge majority. That is a reflection of a society that's very uneasy about its leadership, very unconvinced about where the country is going and who should lead it.
Right. So maybe tease that out a bit more so I can understand it. I mean, I feel like the political landscape of Australia was just, this past election seemed crazy to me because it seemed overshadowed by the US election, for one. So with Trump coming into presidency. And then it just seems like there's just such a lack of trust in leadership within the country over here, that it almost felt like there wasn't any election at all, from my perspective.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
What's that about? What happened?
I don't know. I wish I did. I mean, we're continually told these are the most dangerous times in the last century, and I happen to think that's right. And yet no one is grappling with it. No one's grappling with security properly, with defence properly. Nobody's really being serious about economic management. We have a cost of living crisis, so we're buying voters off instead of doing the hard work to fix the cost of living cost. We're borrowing more money, but it's not government's money, and governments don't borrow. It's taxpayers' money, and you're borrowing from taxpayers. And you're borrowing from tomorrow's taxpayers. You're a lot younger than me. You are inheriting a great big debt because governments have not been prepared to live within, we as a culture, through our governments, have not been prepared to live within our means.
Yeah,
That's what's actually happening at the moment. You know, we are spending more than we're paying in taxes, and to make up the shortfall, we are borrowing big licks of money. And that will mean that there's a bigger government debt, except it's not government debt, it's taxpayers' debt. Your generation and your little girls and those who follow you, even the unborn, will inherit a debt that had nothing to do with them and reflects the fact that their parents and their grandparents lived beyond their means.
Right.
But we're not even having a debate about this.
Yeah. So when someone like me hears that, I think the knee-jerk response is one of like fear and anxiety. And I think that's sort of true of a lot of younger people in terms of they're hearing like they're not going to be able to afford a house. They're hearing they're going to incur this massive debt, and on and on and on it goes. What's the appropriate response then for people that are genuinely invested in Australia as a country, and genuinely want to see it be prosperous and flourish?
Well, the first thing I would say is fear is an emotion that the Bible talks about a lot. We're told not to fear. We're told to place our faith in Christ and to be bold and to be clear-eyed and to recognize that we live in a broken world, a fallen world, if you like. But to, if you like, how would I put it? Prioritize sorting your own relationships vertically and horizontally, because purpose and meaning and place in life is really found in love. Plenty of pop songs about it, most of them meaningless and purposelessness in themselves, but onto something. That is what it's all about in the end. We are loved and we need to be able to love. The second thing that I would say is that this kingdom is, as I said earlier, it's very important, and young people are right to be worried. And I would be quite frank about this, horrible and ugly and all the rest of us it might look. The fact is that we live in a democracy. You have a right to a say. So unless you can think of a good reason not to, you ought to be thinking of joining the political party of your choice, getting involved, turning up, having a debate, having your say, getting to know your state and federal members, get to know them, you know?
Yeah, that's brilliant.
It's really important. And people think, oh, it's all a black art and how do I do it? It's not all that hard to join the local branch of whatever party you believe in and then start going to meetings. And sometimes you'll be very discouraged. Well, most people are discouraged when they go on a diet for a little while too. It seems hard work, but, you know, you've got an objective. You want to make a difference.
Right.
Most people are training for a marathon, find, you know, they get a bit breathless and the old heart thumps a bit at first. Sometimes you've got to break through the pain barrier in pursuit of the higher objectives.
Brilliant. So then that then brings up the question of, like, what's your thoughts then on the idea of keeping your faith separate from politics or work? Is this even possible? And what advice would you have for someone navigating within this tension?
Now, this is a silly hypocrisy that we hear around the place all the time. Everyone has a worldview. Everyone has a belief system. Does anybody think that the Greens should leave their worship of Gaia, Mother Earth, behind? Nobody ever said, well, actually, I think they should, as it happens, because I think it's ridiculous.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that in a democracy, they're absolutely entitled to put their views. And they're absolutely entitled to respect for the foundational beliefs that drive those views. And this idea that a Christian should leave their Christian views behind at the cabinet door and assess policy on its merits is just such trite and silly thinking. I mean, which bit would you like to leave behind? The bit that says the poor and the marginalised matter? The bit that says your freedoms are God-given because they really attach to you as a person of worth and dignity? You know, that society should be well ordered. Which bit would you like left behind, for heaven's sake? People should think.
So, yeah, I love how passionate you are about that. I feel, why
I don't believe in the separation of church and state as formal bodies.
Right.
I believe that's in the interest of the church. You don't want the government choosing who your archbishop's going to be.
Right.
I mean, that sort of happens in Britain. Well, we're not like that. That was a mistake. We shouldn't go down that road. But the idea that people from Christian backgrounds should be somehow obliged, unlike anybody else in the society, to leave their personal convictions and their conscience behind at the cabinet door is an absurdity.
Right. So
and
why
the idea they shouldn't be involved is an absurdity.
Yes.
Our forefathers, they set up a secular education system, and which meant non-partisan, non-denominational, not freedom from, no religion. It meant no preference, really, in a Christian context, that they never envisaged, would never have envisaged when they wrote the Australian Constitution, that somehow or other you would restrict Christians from participating. They actually assumed that, broadly speaking, it would be Christians who would participate.
Right.
Because they assumed that was what we were, a Christian country.
Yeah. And it makes complete sense. I think it's absolutely ridiculous to think a person can act in a almost bipolar manner where you can shut off one side of you that really informs a lot of your views. We don't see it happening with anyone else. But why do you think this sentiment has like crept in and it's sort of taken a hold of so many people's thoughts and ideas in politics, but then also going into the workplace?
I think a big part of the answer is that for a very long time, the churches have vacated the intellectual debate. They haven't pushed back and pointed to the obvious flaws in many of the philosophies and ideologies that are floating around. They've wanted, if anything, to accommodate them at worst, or to withdraw and not be engaged at second. So they've not been salt and light.
Interesting.
That's one of the reasons that I'm a podcaster. I want to bring good, clear thinking to people in a way that's, they may or may not entirely agree with it, but they can hear it out. They can hear what a thoughtful person who may be highly trained, I actually think that matters. You know, I think it really, you know, if we want medical advice, we go to somebody who's trained a great deal in it. If we want to understand what makes a civilization thrive, why not go and talk to historians who have studied many civilizations? You know, it is worth listening to people who have studied things deeply. And you may or may not, in the end, completely agree with them. You may completely disagree with them. But you ought to hear what they're saying. And that's not what we do. And, of course, social media encourages us to follow our own biases, our own prejudices. And, you know, I mean, I find it really disturbing that, you know, you look at a list of the world's 100 most influential influencers. And I think, what qualifications have most of those people got to enlighten us on any of the really serious matters that decide whether we're free and prosperous and secure?
Yeah, that's a brilliant pickup. I think our culture sort of really idolizes that celebrity platform. So what's the cost of that is you lose deep intellectual thought and for the sake of getting noticed or attention or more likes or more views, which is just a really negative feedback loop, I think.
All of the great reformers down through history started out putting views that were deeply unpopular. If you take the history of the abolition of slavery in the British Empire, it started really with a group of people who became despised and shunned and endlessly ridiculed until after many, many years, their utter persistence and patience won out. And people said, well, actually, we've been the dopes, not them. They're actually right. We should have listened. Slavery is a shameful thing. And the British Parliament outlawed the slave trade. No other great empire's ever done that. We denigrate our own culture without recognising what some of our heroes have done. A few years later, slavery itself was outlawed. And interestingly, the British government then sent the Royal Navy out onto the high seas to stop other countries trading in human misery. So we're often told that whites are the cause of all of the great evils in the world. I wonder whether, a black African lady from the inland of Africa who had been absconded with, probably her aged mother killed, her babies slaughtered if they were no use, taken back to the coast, sold for some trinkets to a European slave trader, rounded up by other Africans. This is what actually happened. You see, we don't understand our history, so we fall for these silly tropes that the dividing line between good and evil lies, say, between black and white. One side's never done anything wrong, the other side. We're actually all in this together. We've all made a mess. We've all done wrong things. We've all at times behaved with greater nobility. So there you've got a slave girl, or one being about to be sold in the slave market on the way to the New World, and a Royal Navy ship pulls up and rescues them. Would that black lady say, "Oh, you terrible white racist from the Royal Navy, you dare not rescue me? Or would they say, oh, gee, I'm glad to see you and thank you for putting your line on the risk, your life on the line to save me?
Right. Yeah.
We don't ask these questions. We don't think. I don't know, Caleb. I think it's largely because we've not taught history, and I do think that the churches and their schools have not, many notable exceptions, but they have not gone out there and been salt and light and equipped people to take up these arguments and to insist that we think as well as feel, that we know as well as guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty scary to think that even the history being taught currently is one that's very selective. And yeah, it doesn't do people justice, as we've spoken about, to not ask those questions, and then also not to dive in and just sort of cherry pick what you want to support a certain point of view. I'm curious, Australia and the West are grappling with identity, from, like we've spoken, individualism to social cohesion. How do you see the interplay of Christianity and culture and politics shaping a hopeful path forward, if you see it as a hopeful path forward?
It's going to be a close-run thing, Caleb, but I always hope, and you touched on it, and I'd be interested in you telling us a little bit about what you have observed. It does appear that Generation Z, and if I'm right, they would be people 29 and under, people born from about 1995 on. They're doing a massive rethink. Many of them are badly damaged, badly hurt. We know that, the mental illness and self-harm, those sorts of things. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, there does seem to be a bit of mounting evidence that many of them are doing some hard thinking. Many of them are saying, we need to step up, we need to have a go, which, by the way, is important. I mean, you touched on it yourself. It's easy to be afraid, easy to be demoralised. Better, I think, to see the obstacles before you as a great challenge and something to have a go at. Like the young people in the Parliament, they were very young when they started, William Wilberforce and his friends, many of them. When they started, a lifetime's work to overcome slavery. You know, it was a great evil there in their midst. And they had reason to be afraid too, because of the French Revolution. They were worried about having their throats cut if there was a revolution in Britain. So all ages have known fear, all ages have known great challenges. The question then becomes one of, do we cower in a corner, or do we go out and say, we'll give it our best shot and see if we can turn it around?
Yeah.
But what do you know? What are you seeing with people of Generation Z and younger
Generation
people?
Z. Yeah, I think there's this growing desire for authenticity and vulnerability. And I think what's that sort of looking like is they're seeing the facade that culture is putting up. They're seeing the shallowness of just cherry picking certain things and this individualism as well, where it just presents a really shallow substance of purpose and meaning. And because of their desire for authenticity and vulnerability, they're being attracted to things that are really rooted in truth. And I think when you look at the church and when you see Christianity and Christianity's history, there's a real truth there. Obviously, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And churches that aren't afraid of exploring history and saying we're a part of something so much bigger than ourselves, that's really attractive to a young person, I think, because it's saying, like you're saying before, it's like the Bible says do not fear, but everything in this culture is targeting our fears and our anxieties. So you go into a place where it presents a truth and there's an authenticity around, hey, explore this truth, try and pick a hole at it, and the deeper you go, the more you'll find out that it's rich in history, it's rich in Just thousands upon thousands of years of people giving their life for it. So that the evidence is just overwhelming. So I think that's attractive. And then there's just an honesty in it presents something that the culture doesn't. It presents a way of life that adds value to people around you. It gives you meaning and it gives you purpose. So I think there's that element of it, as young people have seen this facade of trying to look for identity and meaning in individualism or in whatever the culture says put your identity in, whether it's sexual expression or consumerism, whatever it may be. And they're just like, well, that's empty at the end. We're seeing it in the breakdown of social structures. And so that's some of my thoughts. What's your thoughts on the upcoming and future generations for Christian expression?
I've said this quite recently over the last couple of years. I have noticed an extraordinary hunger for what I call steak instead of thin potato gruel, of the sort you might get in a prison camp, from a lot of, and I don't want to sound somehow inappropriate here, but we do know that younger men tap into podcasts a lot for sport, economics and politics. Young women don't so much, and so they don't go on YouTube as much. But a lot of young men do. So I'm amazed at how often they'll pull me up in the streets and say, hey, listen, I really enjoyed that conversation you had with X or Y or whatever. And it's led to some of the most fascinating conversations. And I frankly find myself sometimes absolutely bowled over at the sincerity, the decency, the sensitivity, even the manliness of some of those Generation Z young blokes that tap in and then want to talk to me. So I meet fewer and have fewer conversations about the podcast simply because not as many young women tap in. But it still happens. And I have to say, I sometimes pinch myself and say, gee whiz, I could never have, I wasn't half the kid that these young people are when I was young. I really do.
That's
I'm not saying
encouraging.
that lightly either. I mean it. I think that if they decide enough of them get their act together, I think we'll find we can turn this place around quite quickly over the next 10 years.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, one final question for yourself, John, is I usually do this with our guests. I'll ask our previous guest a question for whoever our next guest is. Our previous guests, I had a few of them. We had a live podcast, so they didn't answer a question. So you've got the luxury of what question you would like to ask our next guest, or what question you think is an important question to ask and have a conversation around, and how would you yourself answer it?
I think the question that I would put is, do you take time to be available to be a sounding board to young people, a mentor, if you like, and if not, why not? And my answer to the question would be to say that I genuinely do try to be available, not least of all because, frankly, I'm a father and a grandfather, and I'm wanting to see the country turned around. And I think we need better equipped, dare I say it, even wiser leadership in all of the institutions of our society. I'm not saying they aren't there now, but I'm saying we haven't got enough of them. Whether it's politics, whether it's the law, whether it's arts and drama, whether it's the media. Don't get me started on the media. Some of the media identities I know in this country are the wisest and most courageous people you could ever hope to meet. But a lot of them are just sheep, frankly.
Right.
They don't know their stuff. They've been taught. One of them actually told me, all I learned at journalism school was that politicians are dishonest, and my job is to show them where they're dishonest, show the people where they're dishonest. What about the big ideas? What about the policies? What about understanding that occasionally, I found myself in this position, politicians actually for legitimate reasons can't tell you something that you want to know the answer to. It does actually happen, particularly with senior politicians. Sometimes you actually need to respect, well, I put them there, they've got to exercise their judgment, because we don't talk like that anymore, but we should talk like that. We should be able to respect our leaders and trust them and recognise that from time to time, they have to grapple with issues that, for various reasons of sensitivity, are best not publicly disclosed at that particular moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
It goes to trust.
What's that?
It goes to trust.
It does, yeah. And I certainly hope that the future of our country, the trust is increased, but that's going to take time and a lot of work and a lot of good people who aren't afraid to speak the truth and to continue speaking the truth despite opposition. So, yeah, I'm really thankful, John, for the conversations that you're having. I find them very helpful, and I know thousands upon thousands of other people are finding them helpful. And yeah, I just encourage you to keep on digging into those conversations, because I think it sort of paints a canvas for people like myself and so many others to look at and learn and grow. So I'm just so thankful for your work, John, and for what you're doing within our culture and within the global culture as well. I know you're involved in quite a bit there, so thanks so much.
Caleb, it's been a pleasure. I wish you well, and I encourage you to, wherever you can, step up, step out. We're not called to fear.
Brilliant.